Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Middle East Solar Industry Association's webinar looking at supply chain for the MENA solar market. Today's webinar comes to you as part of the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. My name is Raed Kirat. I'm a consultant advisor in the clean energy sector, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's webinar. Now, to kick things off, I would like to call upon a well-known veteran of the industry and good friend of mine. I would like to call upon Ahmed Nada, the president of MESIA, to give his welcoming remarks. Ahmed?
Good afternoon or good morning. Thank you very much, Raed, and thank you for all the team members who have accepted our invitation to join the panel today, and of course to all our audience. This situation that we are in really of the COVID and the pandemic over the last year has brought some very significant challenges to the industry. And interestingly enough, the industry proved very resilient, and people were able to come up with so many solutions to many difficult situations here. Yesterday, we were on another webinar on the future of energy, and MESIA released its annual report, Outlook report. And we had some very interesting discussions from the panel's members around what will happen in the future of energy. And one of the key things that everyone is looking at, which is the topic of our session today, is this the supply chain, what's going to happen and what changes and what could be changing in the near future or in the midterm future of the industry. So I think we will listen from our experts today what they have really seen. We have a very respected panel, and I don't want to keep the audience waiting, so I'll leave it for you in your good hands to moderate this session. Again, thanks for giving MESIA the opportunity to support this session, and to Ata and to all the panels, and we'll catch up at the end of the session. Thank you. Back to you, Raed.
Right, very well, Ahmed, thank you. Now, when it comes to supply chain, as we all know, supply chain is one of the main pillars for building a healthy market and a strong industry. And it's something that's been looked at for several years as the market opened up and developed in the Middle East or the general MENA region. For today's panel, we've been lucky that we've been able to assemble an excellent set of experts that really cover both sides of the aisle. We'll be looking at things from both the governmental as well as the private sector. And for today's webinar, we do not have any slides. So we'll try to keep it interactive. And I kindly ask the audience that are watching us or listening in to submit their questions and comments, and I'll try to filter them and take them as they come, either during the discussion or towards the end. Now, to kick things off, I would like to maybe start on a higher level, keep a wider lens. And this is a general question for the panelists. Or before we go there, actually, I should present the panelists. So I would like to call upon, let's start with Muna. Muna, maybe name, title, and any introductory remarks you would like to give.
First, good afternoon, everyone. This is Muna Al-Amoudi. I'm the director of the Future Energy at the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure at the UAE. I'm delighted to be part of the panel. I will be more than happy to answer any question relevant to the government side. I welcome also any kind of interpretation that can be given from the private sector, considering that the setup of the UAE. Thank you.
Right, Carmen.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Raed. I'm very happy to be here today with MESIA. I am the Chief Procurement Officer for ENGIE in the Middle East, and since the 1st of January, also including Africa. I've been with ENGIE since 2009 and in the region since 2005.
Very well. Hisham?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today, and thank you for giving me the chance to connect again after a long period of time. We're excited to see everyone, and hopefully this will turn out into a fruitful discussion. My name is Hisham Al-Fawzan. I'm the Energy Segment Director at the Ministry of Investment in Saudi Arabia. We focus on supporting investors coming into the kingdom in terms of renewable, conventional, energy efficiency, and nuclear. And I look forward to our discussion.
And we're delighted to have you with us. I think Saudi Arabia will be a big portion of the discussion when it comes to supply chain. Vikas?
Thanks, Wade. Hi, everybody. I'm Vikas Bansal. I am the head for business development for Sterling and Wilson. I also lead Europe as a regional head for Europe, which is an ever-growing market. I really, this is a great panel which has been assembled by Raid and Masia. Really hope and wish that we will all do justice to your time, and we will be able to give you some of the insights into the supply chain in the region. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vikas. Alvaro?
Yeah, my name is Álvaro González. I'm the head of procurement for renewable energies in Aquapower, basically dealing with all the main technologies. And yeah, I'm very glad to be here because I think that supply chain is one of the big discussions that we have today, especially due to this pandemic situation, getting a little bit more complicated everything. And yeah, hopefully I can answer and I can debate with my panelist colleagues in a very fruitful and good discussion. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, Jad.
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for Masia for hosting this event and inviting me. And thank you all for the panelists as well. I'm sure it's going to be a very fruitful discussion. My name is Jad Masri, currently employed with Masdar, heading the Supply Chain and Contracts Department at the Clean Energy Division. So I'm sure with the wealth of knowledge and experience that all the panelists have, it will be a very fruitful discussion. Thank you, Ra'ad.
Thank you, everyone. All right, to kick things off, I think it's best if we try to start from a general perspective. When it comes to the MENA region or the Middle East, I would like to ask the panelists, what are your views on the supply chain market in the Middle East over the last, let's say, 5 years? How things, aside from COVID, we'll talk about COVID and COVID impact in a second. But if you go back 5, 6 years, how do you see supply chain changing when it comes to project execution in specific in the region? And how do you see the outlook for that? Maybe Carbon, you want to start?
Thank you, right. I think that you're absolutely right, is that the way that we manage, okay, as clients or a business developer or as an EPC contractor, how we manage our supply chain will change. And we have all looked into the resilience of our major suppliers. So what I see coming forward is that from our side, we will be looking really into partnerships to localize a little bit more of critical suppliers. It's very good to have very good suppliers, and I think, well, when we're talking to solar, there's mainly China. But there are other things that we can do locally, and I think that that's going to be one of the focal points on localization for the future. So we're going maybe to see a shift, international suppliers trying to have partnerships to either assembly, to manufacture locally, something that we have already seen on the thermal side, on the generation, you know, the big gas turbines. I see that this is going to keep coming. And it's also from the economic point of view, I think that the region is still in development and in very rapid development. So it's going to be very attractive, whether it's, we see that in Saudi Arabia, we see that also in the UAE, how international companies that before they wanted to bring the supply from wherever they have the factories, they are starting to consider how they can get closer to the customer. So I think that that's going to be one of the points. So one, because we will have to mitigate risks, and that's the risks of the logistics. And second, let's see how we can optimize in terms of costing. That's also going to be quite important. And I don't see purchase price as a costing, because I believe that the total cost of ownership of what we buy is also going to have an influence into how we, from the supply chain, we can bring added value to the business development teams. Just not to the purchase price capex, but it's okay. Everything is going to be warranties, replacement rates. So where is it coming from? So I do expect that they're going to be localization is going to be one of the points. And the second thing that I would see that that is going to be also a point is that we will be looking into the sustainability. When I said sustainability of the supply chain. And we have seen that there was an announcement from Qatar in terms of emission CO2. So I do have a question, and I think that we can discuss it maybe later with the panel, or if anybody has of the participants, is how do we're going to consider the contribution of CO2 of the supply chain into new development? I think it's a very good question. I don't have the answer, so, but I think that at some point it will have an impact.
That deserves a whole panel by itself, I think, that last point, and look at carbon footprint of supply chain. But your views are noted. I mean, international developers such as ENGIE have been here for decades, and others. And historically, I mean, I've seen projects being executed with the least cost, obviously, with the least risk possible. But things have been shifting and growing, and I think driven by localization and logistics, as you've said. Alvaro, any comments? You've been with Aqua, you've seen Aqua change in the years that you've been with Aqua, and what are your views? How have things changed from supply chain as when it relates to the region from the Aqua perspective?
Yeah, so even if I'm based in the region only a little bit more than 3 years ago, I'm working for projects in the region since some time ago. So I saw the growth and the development of the supply chain, the local supply chain, and the view of the suppliers on the market in MENA region. I mean, the region, even if, let's say, started a little bit late on renewables, because I think that the big projects started in Dubai with Untitled Solar Park, like 5 years ago or something like that. But they are catching up, or we are catching up very fast with large scale utility scale projects. And we are becoming one of the, let's say, most important markets on the view of the suppliers of the world. So I saw a few changes. First, that the auxiliary industries have developed in order to, let's say, support the main industries and the let's say the auxiliary equipments and the auxiliary materials for the installation of the PV plants, and this has grown as well. But I saw the main change that I saw is that now the big players, the big OEMs, are looking at our market much more seriously. They are putting in place teams, they are opening offices, they are putting OEM teams in the region. So that we haven't here 5 years ago, but since the capacity installed is getting bigger and bigger, and it's going to be much bigger, I think that we're going to be seeing more and more players opening local offices, opening even international operation offices in the region. Some of them not only OEMs, but as well EPC have already established international operation offices here in the region. So yeah, the main change that I saw is that since the capacity install is bigger and bigger, the main players are taking seriously the region, and they are seen at the region at one of the most important in terms of growth of the world. And we started with the UAE, but all the countries around, Saudi, Qatar, Bahrain, hopefully, and Oman, and starting to as well develop the big projects. And I think that for the future, one of the main drivers is going to be the kingdom. So we, as a Saudi company, we are supporting strongly, as everybody knows, and yeah, hopefully all these main players will be established soon here with teams, and then, as Carmen said, with factories and with industry.
Any other comments, Jad?
Thank you. Well, what more can I add after what Carmen and Alvaro said? It was it was more than encapsulating. But I think in the region as a whole, specifically when we're looking at regional developers or regional EPC contractors, whichever it is, there has been a significant increase in the learning curve and what supply chain is, what it entails, what it requires. Of course, international players definitely have had that years ago before this region here. There has been a significant catch up, if you'd like, until we are almost at par. As Alvaro mentioned, a lot of the OEMs are opening up offices within the region, whether representatives or even on the long-term service agreements as might be required. But also the international entities and the regional entities have also been opening up offices within the countries where the OEMs are localized. So offices in China in order to enhance and ensure that the coordination and proper streamlining is there to ensure the best synergies. There has also been a substantial amount, I think, of capital that has been deployed into the digitalization of supply chain in the past maybe 3 to 4 years. And I think this year, or sorry, mid to late 2020 and this year 2021, there will also be another yet increase in the deployment for the digitalization, because organizations are seeing this as one of the measures in order to avoid the impacts of a similar pandemic that could occur.
Can you add a little bit more insight on what do you mean by digitalization of supply chain, and how does this de-risk it from a developer perspective?
Okay. There's two aspects where we can look at digitalization from the supply chain perspective. First, there is what you're willing to put in as systems, operating procedures and systems in order to ensure that your communication, notwithstanding what happens, whether from a pandemic or any business continuity requirement event. So COVID is now probably most looked at, and it's linking to pandemics, but there are other FM events or other events that could significantly significantly impact supply chain. So there is also the operating, whether it is the portals, whether it is the modes of communications that have changed specifically in the region with the introduction of new tendering modules, so on and so forth. On the other side, as we've all seen, there is the significant deployment in R&D into the digitalization and also automation of the production lines, if we're speaking on the OEMs, specifically to ensure that not only are they increasing and being more aggressive in what they're able of achieving as term of return on their products, but also in ensuring that no matter what happens, the disruption to their production line is kept to a lower minimal than what would have been expected.
Very well, very well. These are all valid points. And when it comes to the region, I mean, 5, maybe more, maybe almost 10 years ago, very few people were taking this region seriously. I mean, let's be honest, we had plans, governmental plans mainly, that were just beginning to take shape. And international players and suppliers would look at the region and say, why should I come? And now we started off looking at mandates, economic value add of these projects in the region driven by government policies. But it's interesting to see that, a wake-up pandemic like COVID-19, the disruption it had in the value chain, and the need to go local as opposed to importing everything international would really try to make things a little bit more resilient. I want to take a perspective from an execution standpoint. I mean, the region as well is well known to be historical or breaking records in terms of size and tariffs. There is a slight contradiction in terms of trying to develop a value add component to projects while we're still trying to achieve the lowest LCOE. We're seeing, I've been telling people that we're going to hit 1 cent in the next 2 to 3 years. I don't know what you guys agree on, but Dhafra 2 gigawatts, 1.3, I think. How do you see this impacting? Maybe Vikas, you're a world-class EPC, and you've done some of the largest projects, and everybody's asking less. And yet again, you have to give me a very low-cost EPC, and you have to meet A, B, C, D in terms of localization. Maybe tell us a perspective. You've done some of the largest projects that have the lowest tariffs. Yeah. Give us some perspective on that, please.
Let me take a step back and let me make an observation on this entire shift which has been happening over the last 5 years. If you look at supply chain, the major considerations are 2. One is the strategy. Second is the cost. Strategy depends on how important that industry is for that country. 10 years back, most of the power used to come from the gas turbines or fewer coal plants. The strategic importance of solar and maybe wind to an extent was very, very less. So there was no need which was felt for anybody in Middle East to localize anything, because if you can import something at a very, very competitive price from outside, why do it? Why do it here? But now the way the industry has been moving, we all know that in the next 10 to 15 years, so right now, if the share of electricity in Middle East from renewable is only 3 to 5%, we all know that this 5% is going to become 25, 30% as per the vision laid by almost all the governments in the region. So when you have a source of power which is contributing 25 to 30% to your energy needs, you have to localize to some extent. Now the only decision which is left is at what part of value chain do you want to play? Do you want to only focus on high-end activities? For example, do you want to focus on e-waste? Do you focus only on consultancy, research and development? Or you want to get into assembly lines? Every country will have their own strategy. For example, Saudi Arabia, to start with, they probably have taken a route of going to assembly as of now, and they will obviously move up the value chain. So that's one part of it. Coming to your question in terms of how do you manage, transition to a low cost tariff and yet meeting all of this. So my only sort of counter question is, if you're already able to generate electricity from the renewables at 30% or 40% cost of the running cost of gas, which is around $4-5 why do you want to bring the cost down? So if you are able to procure electricity not at 1 cent, but at 1.5 cents, but at the same time, you are able to generate value, right? Electricity from gas, let's imagine, the running cost is around 2.5, 3 cents, a very low number. Let's imagine this is the cost, and solar, let's say, is 1.5 cent or 1.3 cent in Al Dhafra. So for every electricity every unit you generate, actually you are creating 1.5 cent value, right? You can now, as a strategy, some part of that value can go back to the ecosystem and you can develop your ecosystem. I'll give you an example. For example, if you look at Oman, they have a strategy to localize transformers and cables, and they have a good industry, good world-class tier 1 suppliers, and they get a good amount of base load from their own country, and that's the reason they are able to become competitive worldwide. There are players in Saudi Arabia which are meeting the local demand, and they are competitive. So you have to create a good amount of demand for the products in the local market, and then you can expect some of these people to become global players. And this is one way of creating value, and you're only shifting value, right? The value has already been created by procuring electricity at such a low price. You're only taking value from there and you're just putting that into the other industries. But yes, you're absolutely right. If you look at our company, we have localized a lot of things over the last 10 years. A lot of things we never used to do from within Middle East, but over the last 5 years, our own activity in Middle East has really gone up in terms of people, in terms of running the plants, all of those activities. Some of those activities could have been taken out of the supply chain. They could have been done offshore, but as of now we chose to do them onshore because we feel the way the market is going, it makes sense to keep them onshore. So will we hit 1 cent in the next 2 to 3 years? I'm not sure. Will the industry remain competitive? I'm very sure that with all the players who are super aggressive, Aqua being one of them, Masdar NG, all are there. I'm very sure that we will all be innovative and we will be able to hit those kind of numbers. But localization comes at a cost. We all need to keep that in mind. Localization will not be without cost.
Sure. And you've mentioned an example of the Sultanate of Oman, and we'll get into the localization with Hisham and when I look at the government perspective on policies and strategies. But I want to still keep it on the, I don't mean to keep Hisham and Mona waiting, but if you have any comments, please jump in. But I want to keep drilling the private sector, if you allow me. And I want to cover a couple of points that have been mentioned. What about in terms of developing supply chain in the region? What gap areas do you see? I mean, because you've talked about a couple of points, but to develop supply chain, you need know-how, you need some basics that would support goods and services. Supply chain is not just material, but also it's services. What gap areas do you see?
So there are two things which you need to develop and localize a local, supply chain in the local region. Number one, a long-term horizon on the capacity. So if for example, Saudi Arabia or UAE says that we are going to do X number of gigawatts every year, and they actually happen every year, the private sector will take a lot of cue from that. People are entrepreneurs, right? Whenever they see opportunity, they want to jump in and they want to contribute. That's one. So at least, if not 10, 5 to 7 year vision, which is fairly consistent, which doesn't change often. And we all know it's a dynamic world, things change, but a fairly consistent directionally, that's one. Second, in terms of the certainty of the policies, if you say that we have a 10 gigawatt of demand for the next 7 years and there will be a local content, every year the local content policy cannot change. If the local content policy keeps on changing every year, and it has happened, right? If you look at South Africa, their local content policy was consistent, but the demand was not consistent. And now there are countries wherein there is demand, but the local content policy is not consistent. USA probably would be that example. Everybody knows there's a huge demand in US, but they keep on flip-flopping on the tariffs. They keep on going up and down. So two things, demand and consistency. If anybody is able to provide that, I think the supply chain will automatically start developing, both from the supply side and the services side. As you rightly said, Wade, it's not only about bringing a factory and putting stuff here. You need manpower, you need talent here, and that takes a bit of time. Talent doesn't sort of come in a few months. You have to develop that local talent also. And at the same time, in terms of academia, there has to be some collaboration. If you look at Germany, right, all their institutes in the beginning, even today, one of the best institutes for solar PV, they are in Germany. Look at the testing facilities. So everything goes hand in hand. Create a bit of setup on R&D, academia, testing, and start with the lower level of assembly, and consistent policies which do not change very often. I think these are some of the ingredients for a successful local content policy.
Very well. What about enabling functions? What about testing laboratories? How do you see this evolving in the region? And this is a question to everybody. How important is to have enabling functions like testing lab certification? And has this evolved in the region? And then I want to really not just focus on material, but also look at services, because I think the region might have evolved on a higher or a faster pace on the service side as opposed to the manufacturing side. So how do you comment on this point?
So, yep. So, please, Mona, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Yes, I think what was discussed earlier as a private sector is really there is a shift, yes, in the supply chain, as we can see it from the government side. But what was highlighted here with regards to the R&D and the, let's say, the different research centers and the academia support that's required to do this kind of testing as well, and maybe exploring the option of our, how I can say, of getting new technologies adopted. But what I can highlight here when it's come to the testing material and maybe setting the standard for these kind of aspect, we have ASMA, which is part of our, let's say, UAE, which is basically managing the standards. And with regards to this specific aspect, they had developed a specific standard requirement for the material when it's come to the PV cells, and testing facilities has been already certified. So all of that as a background and basically groundwork that's need to be done in order for the UAE to achieve the 50% that was announced as a part of the national strategy. What's need to be tackled here as well is that in the supply chain itself, there is a lot of discussion when it's come, if there is a capacity building happening when it's come to the local context. In the UAE, we can see, yes, there is some shifting happening. Number of the students, graduates coming from this major, let's say renewable, for example, has increased. And there is recent reports that was announced, released from our climate change ministry, were basically indicating that the number of the green job had increased as well. So within that, I think this is what I can say, and considering that it's coming from the government side. But I want also to highlight the point that was at the beginning, which was about the CO2 and the supply chain. This is something that's very close to my heart because I was covering the carbon management strategy before joining the ministry for my previous job. And on that, we had the concept of the life cycle assessment, where basically you're looking graded to grave concept. So from the basically supplying from the, let's say, yes, or let's say shipping of the material till the time it's get used and then it gets basically landfill to some extent. How much carbon footprint is associated with each step, with each stage, with each material type, with the technology, processes, and production that has been considered, and also in the use part of it. This is what I can say as an update.
This is, you know what, let's go into that. I was trying to tally that CO2 discussion a bit later, but since you've opened up and it's a topic close to your heart, Mona, let's go into it. I mean, sometimes in the solar industry, people worry, developers and OEMs, that you know, CO2 requirements will be imposed. But we have to be honest. If we stand back and compare CO2 of any renewable, solar, wind, doesn't matter, CSP, to a fossil fuel-driven power plant, I mean, there is no comparison. We kill it out of the water, as they say. When it comes to CO2, looking at life cycle management, are you saying, Muna and also Hisham, that there are discussions on the government side in the region to impose CO2 requirements? For example, part of the evaluation of the submittals for programs in the UAE with DIWA, and EWEC, or with REPTO, would we expect to see CO2 requirements as part of the submittal? Or is that too close of a question?
Yes, I will take it up as a very generic before going into detail, but I will say it's rather than external forces or external push to get these kind of environmental, or let's say carbon footprint product-oriented things like labeling or certificates to be part of what we are having as a production from the region, rather than having it as a part of the local domestic use. So what I'm trying to explain here, let's say, for example, what we have from Europe, the Green Deal, and what's been basically discussed there. There is a huge share of the products that been locally produced and been shipped to Europe, for example. So on that, there is a mandate to have certain level of carbon footprint. And on that, there is, in the government level at least, a discussion how to basically assess that and how economically the impact will be there. So maybe it's it's an early stages, but this has been already discussed. And also what I need to mention here, also what's been announced recently by, let's say, for example, one of the biggest aluminium producer here in the Emirates. We have Emirates Global Aluminium, and they had basically announced a joint project with DIWA, where basically they're producing their aluminium from the solar. So these kind of shift and these kind of changes in the way we do things, in the way we produce things, or in the way we use things, definitely will be there. Either it's the force coming from outside, as I mentioned, maybe from that we are shipping or exporting these kind of material, or let's say, for example, if there is an internal interest from the government or from the leadership team to do this kind of shift in order to be pioneer and to be the first.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that you've talked about the notion of supply chain in the region being able to look at export market potential, not just feeding the local markets. And when you consider export market potential, if you look at the Green New Deal in Europe, or even North America, or Japan, Asia, then there is a lot of focus on carbon being part of the evaluation. I think supply chain in the region, as they develop, they would be wise to consider things like that. Carmen, I mean, in France, I remember there were 10 government tenders, I believe, that were looking not necessarily at CO2, but they were looking at the toxicity level and material compliance. But if we talk about CO2, how would you define, or what would you like to see defined, if there is if tenders, government tenders are to impose a CO2 requirement on the project, is it just energy payback of the solar PV panel? Or would we look at other things?
I think that to start with, it would be a much softer approach. Okay, and well, in Europe, they have started to put a certain number of minimum requirements, but even in governmental tenders, is not yet one of the criteria used for decision. Okay, so I think that this is part of the awareness creation, changing habits, and then letting all the organizations adapt to the new rules of the future. And I think that this is important, because from one day to the next, if we come up with a regulation, it's difficult to adopt. But the way that I see it is that they will. We can start by something similar. So when we will have a new project, that they will start, and I'm saying a project, okay? Because yes, we do have the PV panels, but I also want to say that we have a lot of civil works, and we have a strong tendency in the region to use Asian contractors instead of local contractors. So that also has a very high, let's say, CO2 footprint. So I wouldn't, the way that I could imagine it is that we will have to measure materials on one side, services on other. And maybe there is a higher limit that a cap that we cannot exceed in projects. So that could be a way of also trying to push some of the localizations, just bring things locally. It could be a way of doing that. In terms of doing a buyback, I think that's a very complex system. I am not really sure that it even works in Europe. The people, they trade on carbon credits. So I don't know if that's the right approach, but I would say on the short term, at least create the awareness by saying how much is your carbon footprint on a full project, and second, establishing caps that we cannot reach, and then that would be to each of the developers to decide whether you bring your panels from China, local, where do you bring your EPC contractor or your civils. I think that will give us the flexibility to each of us to find the best solution. And I would say that at some point there would be a compliance, and that would be part of the evaluation. Where does the CO2 comes from? But I'm really looking into the long term.
Yeah, Jad, Alvaro, have you seen any in your projects that you work on? Have you seen any requirements for CO2, certain levels, or any consideration, or any life cycle consideration at least? And I want to move next to recycling. Have you seen any requirements like that? The tenders in the region that I've dealt with, at least, I haven't seen any of that. What's your experience?
I would say that I agree with you. I didn't see any specific requirement. There are some certain recommendations and certain requirement for recycling. There are certain recommendations on recycling in the tenders that I saw and that we stick to. We are compliant. But when you go or we go to considering CO2 emissions or even local content, I think that both are very, I would say, similar requirements that should be driven by the economics of the project at the end of the day, because it's very difficult to beat tariffs and deliver electricity at a very low tariff when you have certain requirements that are putting some cost adders on your components of your equation of the tariff. So when we talk about local content and CO2 emissions, we need to be consistent with the requirements, and we all the stakeholders we have to work together, okay, to bring a common framework, not only put these requirements on the developers or on the EPC requirements, but work together in a common framework that allow us to achieve this target that we have to lowering the CO2 and increasing the local content. And we can start by the, let's say, the low hanging fruits. We can start, as Muna said, requiring to our OEMs producing their panels or the trackers or the main equipments using renewable energies. This is a very easy way to do so. We are putting into our evaluations as well. We are considering that for the projects that we are working on. for the local content, we can also enhance the existing industries that we have in the countries that we are developing the capacities. For example, in Saudi, we saw that there was a big steel industry. So the localization of the trackers, for example, has been very successful and has been very easy, and is adding a big percentage of the local content in our projects. And they are even able to export at a very competitive prices, and they are so. We have to work in the low-hanging fruits and develop this part of the local content and this kind of policies and CO2 emissions as well, and then thinking about if it is worth to work in subsidies or not, but at least starting by the first layer, no? And,
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of discussion in Europe. I mean, the carbon footprint, by the way, will not be just applied in the short term in Europe, just looking at solar components. It will be applied on any import. If you want to import to the EU in general, there's a lot of discussion on regulators, especially with the Green New Deal, that we will mandate a certain minimum carbon footprint requirement. But once you get into that discussion, I mean, there's a whole slew. What is your baseline? What is your threshold? How do you define it? How do you track it? How do you measure it? It's not an easy discussion indeed, but I think it's something that has to be addressed, because dirty industries will be kicked out of the window in the short term, I would say. Jad, have you seen any requirements? We get specific just with the life cycle evaluation of a solar plant. Have you seen requirements for detailing the module end of life treatment, the recycling, how to rehabilitate the land?
Thank you, Raad. We've seen it in certain tenders, but those were not, those weren't critical or mandatory obligations. There were requirements on what you intend on doing, how do you intend to recycle, what do you intend to do with the glass, so on and so forth, of the modules in particular, but that wasn't enforced, and that wasn't really a main criteria for evaluation or for qualification. So whilst it's still an issue to be discussed, probably there isn't yet the proper benchmark on the infrastructure on how to do it and how to address it. And it's quite a thin line, because if we're really looking at proper carbon footprint, I've seen a question that's saying net zero, which is very difficult to achieve, but still considering that, if we're looking at carbon footprint, we need to, as both all of the panelists have said, it's cradle to grave. So you need to go back not only into the supply of material or into what are you able of manufacturing locally, but what are you bringing from abroad? How is it being produced? What are the design parameters for that? Because also the design plays an important role in how you can reduce your carbon footprint. Looking at real estate, for instance, you have LEED in the UAE, you have Estidama as well. So those also look at the design requirements, and you can score points and having a higher certification or a higher classification if you're meeting those design parameters. But also, it's a very thin line and balance between localization and tariff. Because if we're bringing in modules, let's say from China, there is the carbon footprint not only of the production, but also associated with logistics, which is compared to when you are producing or assembling it locally, you are also reducing that footprint related to logistics and transport, so on and so forth. There has been an attempt, I think, a few years ago, a factory in a free zone in the UAE has tried to assemble modules here. It wasn't as successful because it's quite difficult to compete. So there has to be the proper infrastructure. There has to be the suitable, with all due respect, support, whether from the government, but also from the developers themselves. As Alvaro has mentioned, there has to be a common panel where everybody sits down and agrees. It has to be phased approach. It cannot be shooting for the stars and immediately going for it. It has to be phased. Small steps, low-hanging fruits, as very smartly said by Alvaro. And eventually we can get there. But also, on a point that Vikas has mentioned, is it cannot be constantly changing. There has to be a set goal, a set requirement and parameters, and then work towards that. If along the way there is possibilities of enhancing it, which is something that is achievable, then we push for it, but not making very long strides or very long jumps.
Are there any module recycling centers in the region that anyone knows of?
Not that I'm aware of.
We checked. So there were cases wherein, when you construct plants, you get a lot of, not a lot, you get some of the modules, which gets broken, right? So we were trying to find, rather than going for a normal facility, we were trying to find places wherein you can sort of recycle them, e-waste facilities, at least till last year.
Was this in the region, Vikas? Was this?
No, we couldn't find anything in the region. So as per the prescribed format, you don't need to recycle. You can store them, and what we do is you keep on storing, you accumulate a good amount, and then you sort of ship it out. But if these, and again, you're adding to the carbon footprint. So, and these facilities are highly automated, and they could be set up very easily. So this is one facility which I feel should be there in the region. As of now, it's not there as per our assessment.
And also, I mean, it's not like we have to wait another 15 years before we need a recycling center. I mean, every year, as you said, 0.5% of the modules that were broken, they need to be replaced. And what do you do with those 0.5%? And 0.5% of millions of modules, which is what we're getting at with these massive projects, is actually quite substantial. And I've known, developers, EPCs that look for a qualified landfill, quote unquote, and try to dispose even of non-silicon modules. So it is a topic that I think would be of interest. And it's interesting really to see, and maybe this is, Hisham, this is a good point for you to start jumping in here. I mean, there is the government viewpoint, which has obviously, they're looking at more than just achieving a cheap kilowatt hour price, let's put it that way, but they're looking at the value add that's around it. But there is also the government in the region, and maybe I can say that the government region is very sensitive, and the sensitivity from the government meets the directness and the bullish attitude from the industry, and that doesn't quite match. I mean, I've talked to government regulators saying, why don't mandate and a clear plan of recycling, but at least request it from the developer, because they have to start thinking about it. And if the private sector, if the private sector doesn't see the government looking at these things and slowly taking them seriously, the private sector will never take it seriously. I mean, I'm being a bit crude when I simplify here. So really setting up the landscape is important from the government. Please go ahead.
I think I totally agree with all the points that was raised. And the way that we think about it, I think, and personally, I see it as, supply chain in general and localization is a common goal across Vision 2030, across all sectors, not only just renewables or solar. The Kingdom is looking forward to localize as much as possible in order to capture as much economic impact from the projects and the targets that the Kingdom has put in place. I totally also second that what is important is having a consistent demand that is very clear and a clear local content policy to unlock all of the localization opportunities that the Kingdom has. The way that the market is structured in terms of renewable compared to other markets is that the Kingdom tenders, globally and in the Kingdom, it tenders these projects to independent producers. And the role that we see is we work with these developers, and we have an esteemed list of developers that have worked in the Kingdom already on maximizing the best outcome with maintaining the competitiveness of the pricing. This is, I think, achieved the way that the Kingdom sees it, is achieved by setting a local content policy that is increasing year by year or round by round. As this increases, more opportunities will rise to companies who are working in the Kingdom, and I think this will give the chance to focus on localizing what makes sense more. I think Alvaro mentioned trackers as a good example. Setting the first local content percentage for the first round gave us the ability to localize at least the first part of the value chain. And then the next round will give us a more, I think, demand, which will allow further localization. Going forward, I think this will increase to other mandates without being, I think, sensitive to restricting companies into a certain level or just a certain mandatory list of items to do. I think the way that I see it personally is tenders should be competitive, should be open and flexible with certain limitation thresholds. And then developers have the ability to compete on what makes sense better and what is better to localize, or either from economic perspective, where our role is not to just work with them in terms of delivering the project, but I have personally worked with all of the developers on the panel on their localization plans and the plans of OEMs and EPCs and services that are working along of their projects, either in the kingdom or as well outside, and then giving the right incentives and unlocking the right regulations for these companies to see that the kingdom is a market for them to expand further as well. And then I think as a second step, hopefully environmental impact could be a next focus with localization to have more of a competitive criteria for developers who are owning and developing these projects in the kingdom.
Hisham, if I may, I mean, Saudi Arabia is an important market. And in fact, I mean, one can easily argue that, I mean, the largest base for manufacturing in the region sits in Saudi Arabia today. A lot of it is petrochem, but part of the Vision 2030, you're trying to diversify and shift things to more of a sustainable economy, if you will. Can you describe to us, I mean, you talked about local content. We've seen SAGIA now become MESA, Ministry of Investment, Saudi Arabia. Can you describe the landscape? Who's the off-taker? Who's managing the local content mechanism? What is REBDO's role? What is MESA's role? What is the Ministry of Industry? Because a lot of the comments I get from manufacturers that are actually keen on coming into the region, where do we start? You know, the landscape sometimes is hard to navigate in Saudi. Maybe give us a general perspective of who's doing what when it comes to supply chain.
I think I understand this since the kingdom is going through a very huge transformation. A lot of changes are happening, and sometimes it's very difficult for companies to catch up. This is one of the roles that we see is important for MESA, even before when we were SAGIA, to continue doing. I think as part of the Ministry of Energy role and REBDO, they are responsible to tender projects, to oversee the local content strategy along with other government entities and stakeholders. And then the principal buyer is the Saudi Power Procurement Company, which is responsible to procure these projects along with the full ecosystem. Our role and the Ministry of Industry law and all other stakeholders, we actually work hand in hand with all government entities internally to make sure that we simplify the process as much as possible. I think if I want to get out something from this panel is, as a Ministry of Investment, our role is to become your single point of contact. We have internally all the relationships that we need for all companies who are coming into the kingdom, planning to set up or work either in services or develop projects as well. And our role is to be your first point of contact. We have already internal committees, internal work streams as well, and we do this under the Invest Saudi brand, which is the brand under the Ministry of Investment, where we bring all government entities and stakeholders to support these efforts. So I think there is a lot of work that's happening in the background as well. There is a lot of alignment, and we look forward to having companies reach out to us so that we channel through all of the changes and keep them updated to have hopefully a more streamlined ecosystem.
How do you see the local content policies from the government developing? I mean, we have Saudi Aramco, they have their own ICTIVA program, we have SABIC, we have, I mean, these are governmental mainly entities. But from the government side, is it the local content authority and government authority is the only entity that will be mandated? So there a mechanism that looks at goods and services, capacity building, depreciation of equipment, and so on. Is that the only entity that we have to look forward to when it comes to defining the local content in the kingdom, or is this only for government procurement?
So for government procurement, you're right. This is definitely the equation that will be applied across all projects, and it will be adopted by all government entities. And companies are having, I think, similar. There is already work, either ICTIVA or Rusanad or other local content scores, where it's a very similar model. And then because of these leading companies, they have initiatives to help and support faster localization. For example, such as Saudi Electricity Company, where they have a program called MENA as well for localization. In terms of equation, yes, this is across all sectors. So there is a unified equation across all sectors, where REBDO has adopted this equation to be I mean, the metric that is measuring these projects in the kingdom, and has set the local content score for the first project. And I think the strategy behind this, having this baseline now, is as we go and as more rounds happens, more localization will be required because of expected localization happening from existing rounds, and as time goes by, more companies are localizing, which gives developers a chance to pick from more suppliers locally, and then go towards, I think, further local content score.
Very well, very well. Muna,
yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add to the words that Hisham said, is that if in any case you have some requirements from any part of the supply chain, I think that we as a developer working in the kingdom, and especially as a Saudi company with a mandate of industrialization in the kingdom, we are more than happy to address all these queries and facilitate their understanding on the local content requirements in the kingdom, and address them and guide them through all the requirements that they have to meet, and how to solve all these issues that they may have. Okay, so,
and I think
developers and EPC contractors, we have to support as well all the supply chain and all the value chain in order to actively work in facilitating the local content and the industrialization of the countries where we have projects. It's not only about, as I said before, economically driven, but we have to support actively the industrialization and the localization as well.
And I think, Alvaro, what's happening in round 2 now, and the amount of support that we're seeing from all developers that are shortlisted for these projects is amazing. I think already we've connected with multiple companies through developers who are supporting them to localize. And then our role is we're already working with OEMs and service providers to even support them with additional incentives and other items enablers, so that they can achieve the goals that the developers want for these rounds of projects. So I think, personally, I see the model already working with this round, and then hopefully as more rounds happen, more localization will happen, which will unlock further supply chain development.
What is the LC requirement for the round 2?
17%.
17. Wasn't it round 3 is 18% then?
It will be increasing. I think I'm not sure. I think it's 18. I don't have the number with me, but this was, I think, one of the confusion that happens with companies coming into the kingdom. Is the first round had a different local content scoring. So the first round was 30% out of the overall capex. This round has the local content authority score, which will be applied going forward as well.
Maybe it's a good point to have some feedback in terms of EPC, VCAS, or procurement. Jad, Alvaro, Armin, what are the views on the mechanism that Saudi Arabia is following to increase the local content in the kingdom? It went from pure capex, just to spend. I mean, any product that has a stamp made in Saudi Arabia, if you buy it, you get 100% for that dollar value. You can account 100% to your local content requirement. But now with LCGPA, I mean, one of the things that we had to tackle is that when it was purely capex, we were easily looking at 35% of local content, but now we dropped it to, seemingly, it seems like we dropped it to 17%, but in reality, it's a very hard 17% to achieve, and the goal is to take it up to 30+%. What are your views on the Saudi program, if I may ask that? How do you see it evolving? What's good, what's not so good about it?
Yeah.
So you can start. I mean, Vikas, you want to start?
So in terms of the evolution, you're right. Previously, the local content was not based on the value addition. So right now, the newer version is more concerned about the value addition of from the local parties to that particular activity. We see this as a positive development, because this leaves a very less room for anybody to sort of innovate as in sort of bypass the rules. So 17% we feel is is a fair target to start with, because in the previous rounds, some of the supply chain has already been developed. Moving forward, we feel there are some challenges on the capacity side. For example, if you look at a simple thing as transformer, right? Only up to a particular level of transformers could be made locally in Saudi Arabia. As and when you will go to bigger plants, a lot of that stuff will have to be imported still, because there is no local capability yet developed there. As long as the entire program is gradual, the step up from 17% is gradual, we feel you can manage it. There are still other parts which are not done in Saudi Arabia which could be done. For example, robots. You can easily assemble robots in Saudi Arabia. There are other activities which will add to the local content, but they need a bit of scale, which as of now it's coming back, but the scale has been missing still from the program. But I'm sure with the way the 2030 vision has been articulated, there will be an exponential increase in the capacity. But unless that happens, a lot of other activities which could be localized will not be localized.
When you get requests for proposals from developers, being a major EPC, do you see that number 17 or 18% pushed down as a requirement on you? So Vikas, please give me a proposal. I want to see 18% LC. You get that 100%.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have to, we have to meet that requirement. If we don't meet that requirement, whatever penalties will be paid by the developer, they get passed on to us. So it is a very hard requirement on us, and which we meet. So we have to strategize well in advance. For projects in Saudi Arabia, you have to spend a lot of time with your technology partners, understanding how much localization has happened. And with the new program, which is 17%, you really need to understand what will qualify as a local content. It's a bit complicated, but as long as you are engaging and you are going in spirit, not trying to sort of bypass any law, you can still manage it. But yes, it's a hard requirement on us, and we have to meet the requirement.
And it's important to clarify that the LC in the RIBDA program is not just only CapEx, but it goes on over the operation maintenance.
Yes.
And their numbers are even higher. I think they start at 50% the first 5 years, it goes to 60, and then 70 year 10 onwards. And this is looking at the total spend of the SPV over the life of the project. But if we take an example, because there is a big discussion even within REBDO and within the government of, some people are saying, because they listen to the private sector, some private sector entities saying 70% is too hard, please, I can't achieve it. In reality, everybody is achieving it to flying colors. And yet you have the policy side saying, you know what, guys, it's too easy. You have to raise the bar a little bit. So if you take the 17%, let's give it as an example, RIBDO round 2. I mean, you're looking at goods and services as one bucket. So you can buy services or buy goods, transformers, modules, steel in Saudi Arabia. You have capacity building, whether be it training Saudi employees, Saudi engineers, or developing suppliers, tooling, what have you. You have R&D, you have depreciation. I think these are the main buckets. Give us an example. I mean, 17%, do you achieve it only by construction? Do you achieve it only by buying switchgear? How do you hit the 17%? So, I mean, are you at a point where you have to buy, and this is really Vikas and everyone as well, are you at a point where you have to buy a made in Saudi Arabia PV panel? And be honest, please. Go ahead.
I will probably, request my fellow panelists to also add. So right now we are yet not at a point wherein you need to add a panel. You can meet the requirement without adding the panels. So you can meet 17%, but in order to meet 17%, there are a few challenges. Number one, there is a capacity constraint as of now on the electrical equipment side, which I feel will get sorted when the capacity grows. And then there are a few things which could be assembled locally. As of now, they are not. You have to take those forward decisions wherein you have to work with technology suppliers, assuming you will get the capacity and they will build factories or assembly units locally to meet the requirement. That is, and obviously you have to have services. If you have to work in Saudi Arabia in terms of the localization, Saudization, you have to minimum meet 15% employment requirements, and they also, some of the numbers also come from that. So it's not an easy run. It's not a cakewalk. You have to spend a lot of time honing your local content strategy, because ultimately you're working with cutthroat developers, right? You're working with NGs and the Mazdas and the Aquas, so you have the numbers also need to fall in place. And as Hisham said, Hisham would have said, you need to be competitive at least 3 times, so you have to be competitive as well. So it's a fine balance, a tight walk, I would say, but still you can meet it. And if the numbers go up, it will be a lot of hustle for all the partners. But I believe one thing, as entrepreneurs, as all these companies which are so forward looking, if the numbers go up gradually, and there are innovations which would be required to meet the numbers, and localization numbers which would be needed, I think industry will be able to catch up. Obviously, PV panels becoming local would be a very, very different event altogether. But I'm very sure with the kind of advice government is getting in Saudi Arabia, I'm very sure that thing is not going to happen in the near future.
But numbers will go up, and they will go up gradually. But I mean, there is a tipping point. I'm glad that the answer that you gave is that yes, we can achieve it now, but there is a point when you have to really buy a good chunk of your EPC in Kingdom. And as we all know, the module is, I don't know, 50% or close to it of the solar PV plant. Jad, Alvaro, Carmen, when do you think, at what point in the LC as it is defined today by REBDO LCGPA, where do you think you have to buy a Saudi-made module? At one point, 19, 25%? What's your review on this?
Look, Raad, if you just allow me, it's 17% is currently achievable based on what's available in the Kingdom. And the Kingdom has done some gigantic steps in ensuring that we're not only putting the policy in place, but we're also enabling the possibilities of this policy numbers being met. But there are 2 issues that we need to look at in response to your particular question of when would this threshold be no longer achievable with what is currently in place. There is the capacity versus the pace of bidding and actual projects ongoing. So currently, at the current pace, the capacity meets the demand. But what happens if REBDO 2, REBDO 3, and other projects, let's say, so there also comes online at the exact same time. So the capacity of those projects might exceed the capacity of the local market in meeting the supply requirements. So that's one issue there. One other issue is also, bear in mind the audit reports that are required, which are linked to the supplier and how much have they developed in the past year. So if you're trying to explore a new supplier or a new local manufacturer who hasn't been delivering on another project because they weren't there yet, that would also impact your ability of achieving the 17%. I don't think the 17% now, in my very humble opinion, requires such pragmatic change in what is available as industries in the kingdoms to meet it. I think there is still room for potential slightly increasing the 17% into a higher figure without still impacting it at that stage. But it all depends on, and the kingdom is very good at this, in pacing properly the projects into what is currently available.
You hear that, Hisham? The industry is asking you to increase your LC levels.
Not at all.
I'm very happy to hear that.
لا هشام طال عمرك. No, sir.
No, I think the key word I think that I had, and I'm very happy to hear this discussion, is the capacity constraints. I think, and what I welcome all panelists and everyone listening today, is our role is to work with you on building the capacities of your suppliers. I think this is what makes a difference. Maybe being competitive sometimes requires spending a little bit of effort on developing the suppliers. Our role is to work with you and your suppliers on this. I think I see now companies, and that's why I think it's getting easier and the market is getting more competitive, because companies are working with their suppliers alongside with the government, and then they have plans. Even if they don't execute them immediately, at least they have an innovative way to achieve these targets, especially with the first years where your investment is happening, where your capacity building scores are happening depreciation is started. So all of these items are, I think, keyword to give you a quick advantage at the beginning, especially for the upcoming rounds in this year and next year.
Alvaro, Carmen, any comments on these points?
So I tend to say that I agree with the answers from Vikash and from that 17% is something still available without impacting the tariff, because I think that this is the key point. This is the sweet point. No? At the moment that the level of local content required is impacting the tariff is starting to be not economically, let's say, worthy. No? So 17% is still achievable. Is very close to the limit where some manufacturers has to relocate certain manufacturing capabilities, and that has a cost at the end of the day. Because I mean, relocating manufacturing capacities, even if they are able, even if there are not industry constraints, even if they are subsidies, and the kingdom can have facilitate like land or utility subsidies or whatever. At the end of the day, it has a price impact that we have to somehow work together on how to absorb. And yeah, so this 17% is very close to this tariff impact that may happen if the increase is happening, let's say, dramatically or without the consensus of the stakeholders.
Look, Carmen, you want to say? Give comments?
No, I'm not going to add anything in particular, but I do agree that the capacity, and I'm going also to say the different offer in the kingdom, we have to also give it a chance to develop, okay? Because today is still maybe all the developers, all the EPCs, they're going to go for the same material, the same services available in the kingdom. So finally, we are all competing for that capacity. I think that there was a very good point said by Vikas, that the increase of level of LC and the increase of options that we have, and I'm not going to say suppliers, but also different systems. We were talking about the robotics. I'm going to also talk about SCADA, maybe technical services. I think that needs to be in pace, because otherwise, and I think that we might be able to come with better solutions at that time, because today I think that the solutions that the EPCs they come back with, they have pretty the same elements in localization and the same elements that they come from outside. So at the end, the creativity, the innovation is not there to come with that solution that is going to have an impact on cost. So I think that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that, I mean, the optionality is there. I mean, you all answered that, yes, I can hit 17% and I have multiple ways to achieve it, which is exactly what the way the government intended.
Yeah.
Not to tie your hands as a developer or as an EPC, but to give you that flexibility in achieving it. But the reality is, if you take a solar PV plant, you're very close to needing to buy a Saudi module. By the way, if it's not 18, it's 19, it's for sure 20% LC, you are forced to buy a Saudi module.
Yeah. So I think that's where they we are a little bit at the limit. Maybe we have to give a little bit more of at the moment, maybe staying there. Ensure that the offer that it's localized, the offer that the EPCs in terms of services, but also the O&Ms we have, it's increased, and maybe we will be able to come with more innovative offers, because simply we will have more choice in country to select from.
And I think to Carmen's point, what's interesting, I mean, to look at the next round is this is the first time where projects are happening at the same time. So the competition part on supply chain will be very apparent.
I mean, capacity is one side, but also you have to meet the right quality and expectation. And to be honest with you, you cannot set up a healthy manufacturing base in Saudi Arabia just looking at the Saudi market. You have to look at the export market, as we all know. And there are requirements in the international market, be it CO2 or be it something else that will even exceed what is the current maturity of the Saudi market itself. Now, I mean, in my mind, I mean, because I've been part of this discussion, both sides of the aisle, in the government and private sector, in REBDO round 2, we went out of our way and we took a lot of criticism at the time to really allow for Saudi module manufacturers to take place. As you know, there are assembly shops in Saudi Arabia. they're hard. It's hard for them to compete. They would never be able on their own 2 feet to compete with imported modules from the Silicon Super League, as you all know. But yet we put mandates at the time where we basically defined the LC content in the RIPD round 2, and it will increase the RIPD round 3, and we put exceptions. If you are to buy a made in Saudi Arabia solar panel, you don't have to meet the 5 gigawatt or whatever it is track record, but you have to meet IEC certification standards. Very simple, very clear. And I mean, I think I'll be very honest to say that the few existing Saudi module suppliers that are currently importing a cell and processing it into assembly into a module, very few of the international developers came to even talk to them. I'll be very honest with you. Very few of the international developers and the local developers even came and talked to them seriously. I mean, there was 1-2 visits. Yeah, I'll hit the 17%. There are ways to achieve it, but nobody really took it seriously. So, and I agree with everybody. There is the push and the pull, but it really has to happen. It can't be just all pull and no push. It has to happen from both sides. And capacity building is an important point. Hisham, what are the incentives? What is the Saudi government doing? I mean, you heard it from the private sector. They need to see capacity. They need to see options on suppliers. And it's a nascent industry. I mean, if you leave it to its own device, it's going to be very expensive, and it's going to translate to the LCOE. So what is the government doing to try to support the growth of the industry in Saudi Arabia?
I think that's a very important question to answer. And according to the discussions that we have currently with also potential players that are entering the market, it's not just about, first of all, I'll talk about the regulation, the setup. Companies have options to open a manufacturing facility or a trading or a service facility, which gives them different options on how much they want to invest in the kingdom. If you're doing a manufacturing facility, first of all, there is off-shelf incentives that the kingdom offers, and we'll be happy to share further details with this in terms of custom duties, exemptions, access to financing, all the way to other incentives in terms of being able to export and import products and materials into the Saudi market. This is also open to companies that have a specific business case, and usually this is a challenge. I think once you talked about the push and a pull, this is a challenge we have. What we offer always is that we have a financial team at the ministry working with all government entities. If a manufacturer has a business case that requires a set of incentives financially, we will be happy to work with them. We have the ability to support that. So if a developer or an EPC has a company that has a potential, but they lack just certain incentives, we have a customized incentive for each of these opportunities that we will be more than happy to work with them to make sure that the assumptions are right, and then all the financial incentives and enablers are in place to be competitive, because as you mentioned, that, and it's a critical point, being export oriented as well, and this doesn't make sense unless the pricing structure is right.
What about other mechanisms? I mean, SIDF, are they now looking at providing project finance, not just providing finance to open a factory?
Yes, so SIDF has a program called Untitled. The program has 2 aspects of financing. They have project financing and manufacturing financing for manufacturers. Both are open for companies. And for project financing, I think this is more important for private development. What I look forward to be honest, personally, is to see more private to private projects. This is a little bit delayed in the kingdom. I think if this happens, we have 1 or 2 projects so far. If this happens, this will open the market for further competition. Even without local content score, you will be able to test whether localization is working, because companies will be able to source for locally if it makes sense or not.
When you say private to private, you're talking about the CNI, commercial industrial
yes.
program, 2 megawatt and below. What is the status on that?
So the 2 megawatt and below is already, the regulation is out, it's ready, I think, and smart meters are being installed around the kingdom. So this is open, but I think what is more important as well that's coming soon is the bilateral agreement, and companies having access to large consumers to be able to supply energy and develop IPPs for commercial and industrial users.
This can be either behind the meter, like net billing or net metering, or potentially, we don't know yet if wheeling will be allowed in Saudi Arabia. It's not allowed in markets like UAE, but it's allowed in Jordan and other places.
Actually, I think the regulation is being developed. I think many of the companies that are on the panel and listening are part of that. So the way that we're doing it from a government, from the Ministry of Energy and the Electricity and Cogeneration Authority, which has changed to be the Water and Electricity Authority, has opened this discussion to include as well the input from developers and potential users as well, in order to influence the regulation to be what fits the kingdom in the best way. And what we do usually as part of the government regulation is this is will be published for private sector feedback before it's being adopted and officially.
There is one of the comments that coming in. I mean, it's important to clarify that these LC requirements in REBDO, they have liquidated damages. They have LDs. They're not just nice to have, but developers will be measured and they will be paying penalties if they underscore on the final project that is being built. Maybe now to shift a little bit, Muna, I mean, looking at the discussion that we had on the policies and the general market in Saudi Arabia, UAE has been actually on the forefront in the region, even before anybody else, in terms of ushering in be it a CNI program like Shams Dubai and or large-scale projects, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Solar Park, and now the projects with EWIC in Abu Dhabi. What is the government view on supply chain in the UAE, and what is the general policy on developing supply chain when it comes to solar sector in the UAE? Maybe give us a perspective on that and the key players in that, please.
Yes. As I stated earlier, the UAE has launched their National Energy Strategy in 2017, where basically there we had a target of 50% clean energy in the power mix and complementary with 40% reduction in the demand side. And as that is comparing business as usual performance of 2050, that will help us to achieve 70% reduction in the CO2 emission compared to business as usual. And this exercise of the long-term target setting will enable local entities like, let's say, for example, Department of Energy from Abu Dhabi, DEWA, SIWA, FIWA, all the utilities, to become ambitious when they come and put their EMERS level targets. Why I'm explaining this point, what's need to be understood that we as a ministry do not maybe have the direct influence in the supply chain. However, the utility interaction through meeting the specific targets set by their entities, there is. And I need to explain here also the mechanism has been used here in the UAE, and I think it's much, of course, known by all, but the auction process that has been used by Abu Dhabi or by Dubai when they set the bids out for, let's say, major projects that they have, and what's been achieved, let's say, as you mentioned, for example, the lowest bid for Dhafra project as well as for the CSP project from Sheikh Mohammed Solar Park. It's really interesting because of how this auction process has been done, and also how the PPA has been developed around it. The freedom has been given to the utilities to do that. This will give the flexibility considering the federal, state, and then the specific Emirates authorities and how they interact. The other thing I need to highlight here is that with the new restructuring that happened in the government, I think most of you are aware we have a new ministry has been formed. We have the Ministry of Advanced Sciences and Technologies. And as a part of the previous ministry that we were part of, which is the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure and Ministry of Energy and Industry, we had a specific pillar coming under the industry where they had developed or were in the process of developing an energy industry in strategy, tackling some of the aspect about the clean energy when they were part of the previous ministry. And as I understood from the colleagues that we had interaction with, this draft strategy is still yet to be released. And what I'm trying to say is that as we had a specific strategy built on the national level, tackling how much should be the share of the clean energy in the total mix, we will have definitely a strategy that will support the industry developers that will help them basically in the auction process. Current auction process is that most of the company that will be engaged have strong international records. So, and they will be able to import any kind of technology and support they will need. That will eliminate any kind of risk associated with the projects. But how about the, let's say, medium and let's say small scale developers that are maybe locally around us, and they are not having the ability to use these kind of opportunity. So I think through this strategy, there will be, how I can say, a structure mechanism where basically they can have these kind of engagement happening. This is from the supply side, but also from the R&D side, because that was in the early discussion. The Advanced Sciences Ministry is also having in their strategy a specific pillar for clean energy. And on that, they have a direct engagement with academia. Like, let's say, for example, Khalifa University, Sharjah University, UAE University, and also the Innovation Center of DIWA, and other even international players in the world. In the UAE, maybe we're not following the same, how I can say, way we do things as our colleagues from Saudi doing, but we like to have the mix between the internal, or let's say the domestic resources, and the external knowledge and experience, because that will help us to build on the qualities and what is globally been there, and delivering the projects up into the speed, using the most recent technologies available, and also building internally the capacities that is needed. Maybe the differences in the approach will definitely have a adding value in the context, the local context of each country, but this is what we have in the UAE.
Very well, very well. And it's, I think it makes sense to keep things on a flexible model for the UAE. It's interesting to see that a lot of the service providers, consultants, engineering offices, what have you, are actually based in the UAE, and they're servicing the markets in Saudi Arabia, while we see more manufacturing set up in Saudi Arabia. In the last couple of minutes, I would like, I mean, we can't finish the webinar without talking about COVID. COVID had, you know, it's a disaster in many ways, but at the same time, I think emphasis on resiliency in supply chain that all of you have gone through. And the last thing you want to see or receive is a delay letter from a supplier in China saying it can't supply, can we push it by 2 months? And you have an LD of God knows how much on delay and so on. How has this changed your perspective? I mean, we have the local content requirement. We have that I want the right quality at the right price, at the right capacity. But now you have COVID and what could follow COVID. Let's talk about supply chain resiliency and how does that impact your view and how you handle your logistics and supply chain. Carmen?
Okay.
Very brief, we have 1 minute,
yeah,
please.
Very briefly. I think that we have been working with all suppliers, not only on solar, but also on the production and in the GCC is based on 2 things, anticipation and transparency. So we have strengthened a lot the supply relationship management, working with the suppliers to find alternatives and then identify problems as soon as possible. So yes, we have had problems, and we have found solutions to nearly all of them, working with local partners, rescheduling, and then of course in some cases we have even overstock. Okay, we didn't have an option, and that's more locally. Locally on assets where we are already in operations, but also take deliveries of everything we had. I think that the thing that we have learned is about the logistics, which were really touched when all the containers stayed in China. So even though we had partners ready to deliver, we could not find enough vessels or enough containers to bring material. So something to consider. And for me, the impact is that supply chain, is much more seen inside the organizations today. And as well as we see it, with business development in operations, I think that the value added now recognized of the function has increased.
Good, that's good for you. Alvaro, Vikas, Jad, COVID impact, any comments?
So very briefly, I fully agree with Carmen. I mean, this COVID brought us a lot of imaginative solutions that we we had to work out with our suppliers, and in some occasions stepping in. And that the outcome is that we strengthen our relationships, and we learn a lot more about all the levels of supply chain, from producing the raw materials till the logistics. So yeah, fully agree with Carmen.
So you were
Imagination.
wishing if you only had a local supplier, right, in Saudi Arabia, that they can do it like this, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we pass from just procuring from them to being part of their organizations, practically.
Sorry, right, but we also had issues with logistics in Saudi Arabia. So
Okay.
It was not only China. So I know that most likely Hisham knows. So everyone was impacted.
Sure. Because Jad.
Right from my side, I mean, yes, what was said is there. Definitely, it was a blessing in disguise in some aspects. It wasn't only localized in China, it impacted worldwide. Yes, delays, whether local or abroad, but definitely what Carmen and Alvaro said are key. Contingency planning or anticipation, transparency is key, and trying to diversify as much as possible wherever is possible.
Yeah.
I'll just like to add one point. A brief statement. I wish there could be easier way to learn things. This was a very, very hard way to learn.
That's how you learn. You'll only know that your parents mean business once you've been hit. That's how you learn, the hard way. You're absolutely right, sir.
And it's interesting how you said that supply chain has been now evaluated or elevated within the organization as being one of the most important because it can really impact things. Look, I think we're running out of time. I think this is very enjoyable. Thank you for your time, the panelists. Ahmed, do you have any final remarks?
Yes, thank you very much, Raed, for this very interactive panel, and thanks for all your efforts in addressing some of the key, topics and even bringing new ideas and topics to the panel. Again, thanks to the panelists. I just want to conclude by stating that, some of the key points that I have been, or the keynotes that I have collected through the session. Key focus on localization obviously drove this discussion into multiple directions. Consolidation, capacity building, both in terms of capacity, in terms of the product lines or the services, in addition also to the talent, which I think was an interesting topic, as we see Saudi Arabia in particular and the UAE, the young generations are engaged into this industry significantly. And I think the local content or the local supply chain can only benefit from these, individuals, as mentioned by Muna, in her statement, that more and more young Emirati students are coming out from universities and engineering colleges and services, and they're trying to engage into the renewable energy and solar in particular. I also took note of the, the interesting discussion about decarbonization of the supply chain and the life cycle assessment and how this can become the next step, maybe not as easy as we think it can be, but it could eventually land on our region as well and become part of the criteria for the evaluation. So all in all, I think a great discussion with great experts. I think, MESIA cannot thank you enough for what you've done to the session today, from the expertise and the live discussion, and again, thanks to all our panelists. Many participants, I think, put some questions. I think most of them were answered, indirectly or directly. So I don't think we have maybe time today to answer them directly. Again, I wish you a great, continuation for 2021. From MESIA and its board, I thank them again for the support to me, and also to all my team in MESIA, who have been in a very difficult year trying to keep at least some of MESIA, mission going on with the help of ATA and other partners as well. So I wish to thank ATA for their support on addressing some of the key issues and the webinars that we tried to do over the last quarter of the year. Again, thanks to all our audience across the world, whoever was in the morning, evening, or middle of the day to try to take time from today to participate. And Raed, always a pleasure to see you as usual, as an old colleague and friend. So good luck to all, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Keep safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.